Good morning, and welcome to the service of worship at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tucson. My name is Reverend Bethany Russell Lowe, and I have the great pleasure of serving as your minister. I'm just looking to our tech crew to make sure we're okay. Okay, I got the go-ahead. Our community is as varied as the blooms of the Sonoran Desert. Whoever you are, whoever you have been, and whoever you are on the path to becoming, I invite you to bring your whole self here and now. I extend a special welcome this morning to any visitors who might be joining us and invite you to fill out a guest information card. Our administrator, Mary Weiss, will put that in the YouTube chat right now. There will be a Zoom social hour after service today, but I do want to warn you that in future weeks, we cannot assure that Zoom social hour will happen until we find a new consistent host. So until that new host volunteers, other programming might be occasionally offered. If I can host social hour, I will. But get in touch with me if you have any interest in hosting a virtual social hour on some type of regular basis. There are just 5 of us here on campus this morning. Myself, who you'll see. Most of our worship leaders have decided to pre-submit pre-recorded videos. But we do have our tech team here, and they're going to give you a hello, good morning right now. Thank you to our wonderful AV team, Cassandra Klein, Liz Ravenwood, and Cynthia Johnson. Even though your board did, just at the end of December, approve new COVID policies, Pima County is currently experiencing the highest number of cases ever of COVID, as much as twice as many as this time last year, as many of you know. So indoor meetings will be allowed once we have been at very high on the COVID Act now for 7 continuous days or more. Right now we are at severe, so indoor meetings are not permitted on campus, but outdoor meetings are. So get in touch with Mary Weiss if your group would like to meet outdoors. And we will let you know as soon as indoor gatherings are permitted. Some better news to report is that our HVAC bathrooms ramp capital project campaign kicked off in late December, and they have collected, ready for this, over $204,000 in pledges and donations. That is over 78% of the goal for this project, which is fabulous. Thank you to all those who have pledged and those who have already donated. The pledged amount, that over $204,000, represents just 32 households, which is pretty amazing. And it also means that there are a number of you who have not pledged or not donated yet. And if you are one of those folks, don't worry, you will receive a postcard in the mail this week that will have instructions on how you can pledge or donate towards that project if you wish. If you don't get a postcard for some reason, or if you have any questions on how to donate or pledge, please contact Margot Garcia, who is the Capital Project Campaign Lead. And if you don't have her contact information, just email me and I'll get you in touch. Welcome. We are so glad that you are here this morning. Prison abolition organizer, educator, and curator Mariam Kaba talks about shrinking the space between your values and your actions. She calls this shrinking a lifelong process that is not linear, that is not going to get, you're not always going to always get right, that is going to be 4 steps forward and 5 steps backward sometimes. She goes on, being acutely aware that human beings are flawed makes me actually feel connected to others and opens me up to being more courageous and more compassionate. She goes on, I still think that people can do good. I'm less interested in whether people are good or are bad. I do believe that everyone can do good and take on good actions and live into better behavior. May we use this hour of worship together to imagine how we can shrink that space between our values and our actions, not for the false medal of good or woke or liberal, but for the honor of learning to face human flaws with courage and compassion, for the humility of seeing our fellow humans not as good or bad, but as people capable of goodness. May we shrink that space so that we can be those people. Come, let us worship together.
Please join me in these words of chalice lighting from Reverend Katie Romano Griffin. The words will appear on the screen. May the flame of this chalice, the symbol of our faith, connect us to all who have come before us, all who are with us in body and spirit, and all who have yet to come into being. May it serve as a reminder of our unity and connection across all time and space.
From the light of days remembered burns a beacon bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the power of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion need to call us on our way. When we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the stories of our living rings a song both brave and free, calling pilgrims still to witness to the life of liberty. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion need to call us on our way. When we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. From the dreams of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands a deeper justice built by our courageous choice. Let the fire of commitment set our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion need to call us on our way. When we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, and our promise finds fulfillment, and our future can
Hi, friends. Did you know that back in 1860, there was an organization called the Wide Awake Club? It's true. Though many of the details are lost to time, what we do know about them is that they were local youth organizations cultivated by the Republican Party during the 1860 presidential election to elect Abraham Lincoln. Now, they used a lot of contemporary techniques to enroll people and get people interested, like social events and even comic books. They introduced political participation to a younger group of voters. They were launched in March of 1860 by, quote, 5 young dry goods clerk in Hartford, Connecticut. And by November of that year, the Wide Awakes had developed into a nationwide grassroots movement with hundreds of thousands of members. Many of these men, and they were all men at that time, organized in order to move the country to abolition. That means anti-slavery. They reported to have used tactics like banging pots and pans outside the windows of anti-abolition representatives' homes in the middle of the night, waking them up and sometimes demanding that they give impromptu speeches on the spot. And because they believe in a country free from slavery, they were moved to march and to rally and to elect abolitionist leaders, including Abraham Lincoln. Because they believed that society had let them down, they vowed to right the wrongs that they saw around them. And I'm curious, has society ever broken its promise to you? Has it let you down? What did you do? Today, there's a group in Arizona and around the country who have also said, my country isn't living up to its promises, its commitments, and I want to change that. They are also mostly younger people, but this time around, they come from all walks of life, wealthy and poor, working or unemployed or in school, all races, all genders, all people together for a better world. This community is called the Sunrise Movement. Their particular passion is the intersections between climate change, racial discrimination, housing, and employment. In their words, quote, "The Sunrise Movement is a youth movement to stop climate change and to create millions of good jobs in the process, good paying jobs to build a just, sustainable, and people-centered economy." They have chapters in Tucson and Phoenix where they do things like attend legislative sessions, demonstrate in protests, and phone bank to legislators to keep the pressure on to make good laws. The commitment of the Sunrise Movement is inherited from the Wide Awakes and other movements which have worked to create a more just and equitable society in the US, such as the Poor People's Campaign, which Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. worked to build, who we are honoring this weekend. These and so many more are out there in big and small ways shaping our society. Now it's your turn. I invite you to look around. In what ways have you felt disappointed by our society? Who else is doing the work to right that wrong? And how can you join with them?
Reverend Michael Schuler writes, "If you are proud of this church, become its advocate. If you are concerned for its future, share its message. If its values resonate deep within you, give it a measure of your devotion. This church cannot survive without your faith, your confidence, your enthusiasm, or your resources." The life of our congregation has continued to thrive throughout this pandemic. Even though we have not been meeting much in person, our congregation depends on your financial support. To support our congregation, you can send a check to the office, as always. You can give online at uuctucson.org/donate, or you can text 833-361-5796.
Our earth is strong. It can hold our pain and our joy, our love and our anger. Our shared bowl, which we use for joys and concerns each week, is strong enough to hold the big rocks, our collective celebrations and mournings, and also the smaller stones that will be added to signify our individual joys and sorrows. In particular, we hold in our hearts all who are affected by COVID-19, especially our frontline medical workers, our educators, parents, and children as the schools continue to struggle with the number of people falling ill each week. We who live in the desert know that water is a life-sustaining and scarce resource. Let us remember those desert people who first came into this place. We honor the Hohokam, the Yavapai, the Tohono O'odham, the Yaqui, and the people who no longer exist as tribal entities here in Arizona. Let's remember those who are walking through our desert right now without access to water. We pour water from a plastic jug, similar to the ones used by those seeking to assure greater access to water in the desert, like our ministry partner, No More Deaths. If you have a joy or sorrow to share, I invite you to type it into the chat or speak it out loud wherever you are. As you do that, Reverend Bethany will place pebbles in the water to symbolize the joys and sorrows within our community. The pebbles create ripples of hope, even as we are far apart.
Lifting up from the YouTube chat, prayers for Diane Deho, Marilyn, Ariana, Jerry, Jim, Cheryl, and Vicky, sending you love and comfort for your journey forward. Also lifting up that our beloved Byron Skinner died just almost a year ago, and boy, we miss him so much still. And the joy of new friends coming to Tucson lives alongside that sorrow. Sorrow for Roy and all those others who have breakthrough and other cases of COVID and who are still very sick. Gratefulness that we have vaccines and medicine to keep us from severe illness. And also prayers of love and comfort for our Jewish siblings after the hostage situation in Colleyville, Texas yesterday. And love as well to our Muslim siblings who experience more xenophobia after these types of tragic events. Any act of hatred is an act of injustice. Our words of prayer, of centering, of meditation this morning come from Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman from his book, The Inward Journey. I invite you into a comfortable space to hear these words, to let them settle into you. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. Despite the dullness and barrenness of the days that pass, if I search with due diligence, I can always find a deposit left by some former radiance. But I had forgotten. At the time, it was full-orbed, glorious, and resplendent. I was sure that I would never forget it. In the moment of its fullness, I was sure that it would illuminate my path for the rest of my journey. I had forgotten how easy it is to forget. There was no intent to betray what seemed so sure at the time. My response was whole, clean, authentic. But little, there crept into my life the dust and grit of the journey. Details, low-level demands, all kinds of cross currents, nothing momentous, nothing overwhelming, nothing flagrant, just wear and tear. If there had been some direct challenge, a clear-cut issue, I would have fought it to the end and beyond. In the quietness of this place, surrounded by the all-pervading presence of God, my heart whispers, keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in fair weather or in foul, in good times or in tempests, in the days when the darkness and the foe are nameless or familiar, I may not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. May we make it so.
Great Spirit, come and rest in me. The ends of the earth are in thy hand, the seas are deep and far off land, and I am thine, I rest in thee. Great Spirit, come and rest in me.
This reading comes from Unitarian Universalist minister Teresa Nanan Soto. It's called Time for the Work, from their book, Spilling the Light. I'm not prepared to hear you say one thing and watch you do another without even mentioning it. I'm not talking about mistakes. You know we all make those. Sometimes we speak too soon and think too little. We worry more about procedures than promises. We let fear and guilt keep our choices and actions small. Those things, common and human, keep calling us forward to different, better choices. I'm thinking of a different thing, in which you know the right thing to do, and spend entire notebooks of calculations figuring out how not to do it. Or, conversely, you give no thought to it at all. It's understandable that to learn, the student must be ready. And if you choose not to be ready while the world cries out for your help, choose to linger in indecision and shrug off the human cost, you are wasting the gentle flexibility of grace. And as Frederick Douglass said, using your liberty for unholy license. You must account for this day. Choose justice. You must account for your gifts. Generate love. Your effort in community is a precious resource. Take courage. Move with urgency toward every possibility. Please hurry. Don't stop.
I love those words from Marian Kaba from the call to worship this morning, that charge to shrink the space between our values and our actions. And Reverend Teresa Soto here has a second charge for us in that reading that Wendy read beautifully, to move with urgency towards every possibility. Please hurry, don't stop. How can we shrink that space? How can we move with urgency towards every possibility? It can seem insurmountable, but what if that's our fear talking? What if it's more simple than we are told to shrink that space, to move with urgency? And what if, as these two charges assume, there is always something you can do? Yes, even you. Yes, even now. Last May, this congregation voted with a supermajority to adopt the 8th principle, which reads, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions." This Sunday and next, we will be looking at just 2 phrases from that principle and investigating how we could adopt this principle, not just with our votes at a congregational meeting, but with our lives as Unitarian Universalists. This principle makes a number of assumptions. We could unpack all of them in an hour or 2 over coffee. But one of them is that there is always something that each and all of us can do to dismantle racism and other oppressions. We each have a role, and it is not only our choice, but now, because we voted for this principle, our obligation to take action to dismantle oppression and racism beyond us and within us. The work of dismantling racism within and beyond us is intertwined, inextricable from one another. And there is work for each of us to do in each area. On April 16th, 1963, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. penned his letter from Birmingham jail. Pieces of this letter are often quoted. An excerpt even appears in the back of our gray hymnal. We might even read that part of that letter next week. It's lovely. But the point of this letter from Birmingham jail is not always captured in these excerpts. The point of the letter is not to inspire the masses and bring us together. It's not happy-go-lucky. It is a specific and explicit rebuttal to the critiques on the civil rights movement by prominent white religious leaders in 1960s Alabama. White moderates, in Reverend Dr. King's words in this letter. Letter from Birmingham Jail is a 101 lesson in anti-racist organizing. Reverend Dr. King starts by outlining the steps of any nonviolent campaign and then demonstrates how the direct actions for voting rights were outcomes of those campaigns. He is not defensive, but instructive. Responding to the claim from these white clergy that the civil rights direct actions were causing, quote unquote, racial friction and unrest, Reverend Dr. King responded, "Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seems to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored." He goes on, responding again to the claim from white clergy that the direct actions in Birmingham were, quote unquote, untimely, writing, "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ears of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied." That's the end of Reverend Dr. King's words for there. I want you to look at a picture with me. Let's see if we can cue it up. Good. Many of you might recognize this photo, or at least the time period it was from. Can you get close enough to your TV or device to see any of the words on those signs? We march for first-class citizenship now. We march for effective civil rights now. We march for decent housing now. We march for first-class citizenship now. We march for jobs for all now. We march for an end to bias now. These signs are 50, 60 years old, but they could have been written, many of them, today. Justice too long delayed is justice denied. So what do we do now? Nearly 60 years after this letter was penned, its words, its wisdom still ringing in our hearts and minds. This week, as I listened to Reverend Dr. King's read this letter, another passage stood out to me. Hear this. "Lamentably, it is an historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture, but groups tend to be more immoral than individuals." If you trust Reverend Dr. King's experience as a leader working for change, then you can take from this statement that group change does not start with the group. It starts with the individuals. It starts with you and me, and then it becomes us and we. What can you do to become more anti-racist? What can you do to become more anti-oppressive? What can you do to transform yourself? If we return to that eighth principle, which we have adopted, it does not say sit and think. It does not say hem and haw. It doesn't say get defensive, insist that you don't need to change. It says, changing the pronouns here, work to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by your actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in yourself and your institutions. What if the simplest actions you take every day, making dinner, watching television, taking a class, reading a book, what if each of these actions could be more anti-racist, more anti-oppressive? What if you got that food or cooked that meal from a different place owned by a family of color? What if you took in media from voices you don't hear from in your everyday life? What if you curated your kids' library choices to include more main characters from the margins? And what if you didn't just do that, but you figured out how that might change you? Not just make you smarter or better, those aren't the goals, but let your mind and your heart be changed, transformed. Confront the pieces of yourself that were made uncomfortable by whatever you changed and push through to see how you could change again. Often we think of justice as marches and petitioning and demonstrating, and that's all worthy, but justice, the type of transformative justice that Reverend Dr. King, among many others, has written about, starts here. And where each of us is now is not the goal. We all have work to do to dismantle racism and oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions, and justice starts here. But it doesn't stop here. We do need to change our institutions and our communities too, of course. But the premise is the same. Something has to change. We can't keep doing now what we have tried before and what failed. Justice has been too long denied for that. Move with urgency towards every possibility. Shrink the space between your values and your actions. Janine Gelsinger, who's the executive director of the UU Justice Arizona Network, reminded me this week that the theory of change, which is often used in societal transformation work, teaches us that in order for anything to change, you have to do something different than you've done before, which is kind of like a, well, duh, but it's something I forget. I don't know about you. As you likely know, the systematic dismantling of voting rights is not only a threat, it is happening. It has been happening and will continue to happen, and it is only encouraged by the lack of serious federal accountability for states monitoring their citizens' right to vote. What can we do differently around voting to make real change? I got thinking of the Ride to the Polls campaign on the Navajo Nation in 2020. They were facing an inefficient and underfunded rural mail system. The idea of mail-in voting was proving difficult for people who lived on Navajo Nation. The pandemic made ride sharing in cars, which they'd done before, impractical, especially considering how many Dene elders had already succumbed to COVID. So Dene organizer Ali Young organized a 10-mile horseback ride from Church Rock on the Navajo Nation to the polling stations in Kayenta, Arizona. This effort connected with many Dene people because horses are sacred to their culture. This effort to ride horses to the polls helped them connect with their culture and their ancestors. Navajo Nation's voter turnout was higher than their surrounding state and area in 2020, and a greater majority of votes went towards the presidential candidate who was seeking to preserve democracy. What about redistributing power? What about redistributing power away from the police and towards much-needed community resources, which I know is an area where good white liberals sometimes get a little stuck, as if there's not a possibility to move forward. How can we make change happen there? Janine reminded me that in 2020, Phoenix City Council proposed a civilian review board that would create a separate entity outside of the police department to review cases of police misconduct. The proposal came from Councilmember Carlos Garcia, who was previously an immigration justice organizer and was elected to the council in 2019. However, Phoenix's mayor, Kate Gallego, proposed her own version of police accountability in which it would remain with the police department to hold themselves accountable. On the day of the vote, almost 2,000 people weighed in their comments on the new online system at the city council, including at least 25 Unitarian Universalists. Mayor Gallego changed her vote at the last minute, voting against her own proposal and with Garcia's. She said during the meeting that she couldn't ignore that so many people had shown up, and they weren't the usual suspects of activists, but just regular people who had never been to a city council meeting before. In this way, all those regular citizens decided to do something that they hadn't done before, took 5 minutes to leave a comment, and completely changed police accountability in Phoenix. There are simple things we can do, personally and collectively, to shift, to change, to intentionally align our actions with our values. Big change starts with those small actions, those comments, those horseback rides, in one example, changing books, changing where you go to eat. The answers of what can I do are not always clear. But what if you asked, rather than what can I do, ask what can I do differently? If you ask that, I think a number of answers will arise. Some might be better than others, but you have options. In the coming week and month, how will you shrink that space between your values and your actions? How will you create a sense of urgency to hurry towards every possibility? In the end of his letter from Birmingham jail, Reverend Dr. King asks, "The question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice?" Being an extremist for love, being an extremist for the extension of justice requires that we do something different, because our world needs more extremists for justice, extremists for love. And extending justice, which is a different outcome than is happening, requires that we do something differently. There is something that you can do differently that will create more goodness in this world. Do that. If we all do that together, we just might save us. May we make it so, and amen.
Courage, courage, my friends, you do not walk alone. We will walk with you, and sing your spirit home. Justice, my friends, you do not walk alone. We will walk with you, and sing your spirit home. Freedom, my friends, you do not walk alone. We will walk with you, and sing your spirit home. Peace, my friends, you do not walk alone. We will walk with you, and sing your spirit home.
These words of closing come from Unitarian Universalist Reverend Marta Valentin in her book, A Long Time Blooming. You must live and breathe. It must be the first thought in the morning and the last at night when twilight descends. It must be what you search for in the darkness, the light that ideas you to find who you are, where you are, what you are. It is understood already that you would die for it. But would you be willing to be born again for it? Change your cells for it. If you were dying of thirst, it would be your only drink of water, the only liquid to quench your thirst, sate your parched soul, resuscitate your empty lungs. In the dead of winter, it will be your fire, blanket, scarf, and hat. In the desert, it would be your mirage and your oasis. Even when you don't want it, can't stand it, despise it, it will come looking for you, haunt you, track you down, beg your attention and your love. For the purpose that you were blessed with knows no bounds, only that if you are not paying attention, you will be lost until it finds you, until you heed its call and be who and what you are meant to be. And now please join me in these words of extinguishing our chalice as Cassandra extinguishes the chalice. The words will appear on the screen. When we take fire from our chalice, it does not become less, it becomes more. And so we extinguish our chalice, but we take its light and warmth with us, multiplying their power by all of our lives and sharing it with the world.